A lot of people say that Elantris is Brandon Sanderson's weakest work inside of the Cosmere, and maybe even overall as well. Do I agree? Somewhat. In some ways, definitely it is. But in other ways, I really enjoyed it, and I thought it was actually quite different to the rest of the Cosmere. And there's one thing that I really liked about it. But I'm going to talk a bit about how it ended, some of the storylines and how they tie up, and then my overall thoughts about this book. So let's jump into it. The first thing I want to talk about is the positive. So the thing that I really enjoyed about this book, and it's something that I don't think we get across any of the other Cosmere books that I read, and I think it's partly because it's just one book alone, and a lot of it has been longer, like trilogies, or for example the Stormlight Archive, even though I've only read the first two, that's going to be 10 books. I read Mistborn, that's 3 books. Warbreaker was 1 book alone. But what Elantris did was it brought 3 characters together, 3 main characters, and it's the first time that we get 3 main characters who are all pretty much fully developed. They all are somebody not to be trifled with regards to politics. They know where their values lie and what they're about, mostly. They're at the peak of their powers. And although obviously there are some developments, like Hrathen does battle back and forth with his values with regards to his religion, but overall he's in the twilight of his career. He's near the end of his career. He's had a ton of success previously. It's not about his come up and him developing into that person. It's more about a crisis of faith later on in his life. Raoden obviously has to deal with becoming an Elantrian, which isn't a good thing anymore, and dealing with that. And then so does Sarene have to deal with that later on as well. But overall, these are things that they kind of take in their stride, if I'm honest. Like, they're so certain of who they are, what they're going to achieve, and the fact that people are relying on them, that I feel like it's the first time in the Cosmere that we get 3 characters like this. Most of the time, we have a younger character who has a ton of figuring out about who they are, what they want to achieve, and really coming to terms with just being at peace with who they are and what their mission is. And that's something I really enjoyed about Elantris. I thought the fact that those 3, peak of their powers, all forces to be reckoned with, meant that we could just dive into the story, which was great. So let's talk about Hrathen's end to the story. So when I left you last, I believe I was just about to start chapter 34. And some obviously huge things happened throughout the end of the book. Hrathen's story was probably my favorite. I thought he was the most interesting character because of, well, there was a lot of reasons why I thought he was the most interesting character, but the thing that stands out was his crisis of faith. I thought that was such an interesting storyline, and it was well played throughout the entirety of the book. You could tell that there were things weighing on his mind, especially with how the Duladins and that conversion went, which was really a bloodbath. He was weighed down with guilt from that, and he didn't even really admit that to himself, but in his desperation to convert Arelon instead of have the people come in and just do the same thing as they did in Duladin, you can see the desperation for that not to occur, because in his heart I think he is a good man, and he does, if he's not a good man, he does believe in the good principles of his religion, and that didn't sit right with him, as we see at the end of the book. So we have his crisis of faith, we have him going into Elantris, coming out of Elantris, and we also see him come to terms with his religion, and he realizes at the end that it's actually the prophet, was it Warren, I believe, that he has a problem with, and those who are speaking for his God rather than his faith in his God. And that was a really cool moment throughout, and obviously he ends up being a bit of a hero. But if we backtrack a little bit, one of my favorite moments from this last section is when he meets Dilaf in the market. He's feeling pretty good about himself at this point, Hrathen that is, and then he just realizes, and I think that Hrathen's quite good at judging people. He's very, very intelligent. He seems to understand psychology to a high level, especially mass psychology of crowds. He sees Dilaf in the market, and he realizes that this man is a demon, and it kind of gave me chills at that moment. And Dilaf doesn't even do anything that scary, but Hrathen just knows that this man is not a normal man at that moment. So in the end, obviously Hrathen decides that he doesn't want genocide. He doesn't want what happened previously, and that if Dilaf gets his ways, that's exactly what it's going to be. And Dilaf and the rest of his, was it temple or priesthood? I can't remember. But his sect are truly terrifying. They seem to make a trade-off and become very, very strong and almost invulnerable. And we discover that a lot of that is done through human sacrifice to make that happen. And it turns out that Hrathen was also a part of that sect for a while and realized that he couldn't hack it there. And the beauty of it is that part of him that was changed in the ritual that did the change for Dilaf and everybody else, that part of him is, it comes in clutch for him basically at the end. That plus him having his armor on that turns out wasn't just for show, it was full strength armor, and it surprised everybody. And it just shows the dedication to his craft that Hrathen had. And the biblical moment at the end where he kind of offers up Dilaf to his god, and it kind of is like he's saying, I'm sacrificing this is what's wrong, not with the religion, but what's wrong with people who are viewing his God and using it incorrectly almost. And I'm not sure if I'm communicating that correctly, but it was a pretty powerful moment. He seemed to offer him up and then obviously killed him, and Hrathen died as well. And he died a hero, and I'm glad he was remembered as such. One thing that was very strange though was I didn't pick up at all on the fact that Hrathen was feeling romantic towards Sarene. I don't know if any of you picked that up, but I completely didn't. And I don't know if it was because maybe Sanderson did it too subtly, or if maybe I was just too dim to pick it up. But that surprised me near the end. Didn't see that coming at all. I know that he enjoyed their political games, but yeah, I don't know. Did you notice that before his reveal? So Hrathen, he dies a hero, fantastic storyline. Dilaf, I thought he was a fantastic villain. He was a villain that was just full of hate and full of anger and very believable. Like, he was just a rabid dog throughout. Now, a couple of things that I found difficult to believe. Number one, I found it difficult to believe that a man so clearly tied to his religion took a loved one to the Elantrians. That doesn't seem like something he would do. But, you know, if I can believe that, then the slight that the Elantrians gave him and then the death of his loved one really would fuel his hate. But would the rabid dog be able to hold himself back for the length of time that he was undercover? I just don't know. But then again, we didn't see the prophet, the one who speaks with God, Warren's powers. Maybe Dilaf is very fearful of the Warren's powers, and I don't know if it's something we're going to see later on. I'm not sure if there's more to this story, but the world was good and the world was exciting. And I also enjoyed the fact that the magic really wasn't the centerpiece. It was an afterthought. It was more the ethics and the politicking and the maneuvering, the chess game that was being played between Raoden and Sarene, the other parts and pieces, and then Hrathen and Dilaf. And I enjoy that, although I love the magic systems as well. It was nice not to have to use them as a crutch for every scene. So Sarene, another fantastic character. Something was frustrating though. Something was extremely frustrating. So Sarene is very intelligent. Potentially the most intelligent of everybody involved in the story. She sees through Raoden's disguise when he's Raoden acting as spirit, acting as a Duladin, within like 3 seconds. How can she not know that it's Raoden that is spirit for so long? It doesn't make sense. Because I know that she hadn't really met him in person, but they'd spent what the book said was a really long time talking, and she's just smart. Like, and I feel like she'd fallen in love with him already, so she would know the types of words he uses, the type of sense of humor. Like, it just was very unbelievable that she couldn't figure out that it was him for the duration. So that's my one frustration with Sarene. Outside of that, Sarene and Raoden's relationship is the best love story in all of the Cosmere so far. Actually, I quite enjoyed the love stories in Warbreaker. Maybe I enjoy the love stories, the romances, in the one-off books because there's not terribly written flirting stages. They just kind of like each other to begin with. But even like Susibron and the princess in Warbreaker, this is definitely more romantic, Sarene and Raoden. And she's smart, she's determined, she's resolute. And what makes this romance so beautiful is the fact that she is so broken so many times. Initially, she's going to get married back in her home country and that falls through. And then she's very, very lonely. And then she falls in love with Raoden, arrives, realizes she's a widow and has to crack on. Then she, for the good of everyone around her, is going to marry a really, really old guy who's really nice, but really, really old. That falls through on the day because she goes through the Hoid and has to become an Elantrian, or so she thinks. And then she just rediscovers her love, going to marry him again, and then he gets stopped again, and you're just like, oh mate, she cannot catch a break, but then she does. And I love the fact that she did not care what Raoden looked like in the slightest. She's a very, very moral woman. And now she was going to marry someone who was an Elantrian and looked horrific and was going through pain and, you know, not ideal. But because of her sticking with that person and not caring about their image, she then gets to marry this amazing person still, but who looks like an Elantrian. And nobody said that they're good looking, but, you know, it sounds like they're good looking and they're very prestigious. So I'm just happy for her. Like, the implication is that she's going to live happily ever after, and, you know, she deserves it. Probably my favourite moment for Sarene near the end was when her uncle came to save her from, and I cannot remember the name. I know obviously Dilaf was the head of them, but I cannot remember the name of that sect, that priesthood. So anyway, a couple of them have her, and her bear of an uncle comes out with this axe and just kicks butt basically. And we discover that he was potentially actually supposed to sit on the throne. His birthright may have been taken from him from her father, and he's the pirate Crushed Throat. That was a cool reveal, and I had a lot of time for Kiin. So on to Raoden, probably the most positive man in all of the Cosmere. And I'm talking about fully formed characters. Hrathen is definitely fully formed. He has a long resume of feats behind him. Sarene, very similar. She comes and she's intelligent, more intelligent than nearly everyone around her. She has integrity. She knows who she is, what she's trying to achieve, and she overcomes challenges. Raoden is potentially the perfect leader of men. He is fully formed and makes the correct choice at every turn. He starts learning the door. He fixes Elantris. He treats everybody with kindness and respect. He brings people back from the Hoid when they're feeling, you know, like the end. He defeats the Hoid, basically. He then fixes Elantris. It's just win after win after win after win. And obviously he got stuck into Elantris, and that was a big L for him. But I don't know, like he just seemed too perfect, if I'm honest. And I mean, maybe that's a criticism of the book, is that they all didn't really have to go through a bunch of development. But the good thing is I really like the characters, and because they were so fully developed, we could just attack the storyline, as I mentioned earlier. But yeah, he did a great job. He was amazing. I would like to take this moment to give myself a massive shout out. If you've watched the previous videos on this book, this is by far the most accurately I've guessed, like, the magic system and the ending. The idea that the earthquake caused an issue with, like, the overall Aeon, you know, I'm pretty chuffed with it. I'm very happy. It will probably never happen that accurately again, but it was a cool magic system. I like that it wasn't over-explained. We have no idea what the door is and where it comes from. It's alluded to that the rest of the world accesses the door a little bit differently, which opens up a ton of possibilities. But I like that we didn't get stuck and hung up on, you know, the intricacies of how it worked. Because he's so accurate and so descriptive in the other books about the magic system, and it's so heavily tied to the rest of the storyline. I like that we were free of it in this book. However, I do prefer the clear knowledge of it, you know? And again, I think it's because it's just one book. It was the same in Warbreaker, although Warbreaker definitely had the deeper explanation. we didn't really get to the bottom of the magic system like you do in Mistborn, for example. We also see Hoid. He pops up as like a helper, essentially. So I don't really know why he popped up there, but it's nice to see him in the early work as well. So overall, it is his weakest work, definitely. But it's still a very good read. And in this, it's pretty unanimous that people think it's his weakest work, from the opinions I've seen anyway. If this is his weakest work, I mean, this is better than a lot of people's best work. So it is fantastic. I still very much enjoyed it. Is it one that I'd be really excited to reread? No, probably not. But it's fleshed out the world a bit more. It's given me more characters to look for on Roshar when I move back to the Stormlight archive. And why was it his weakest work? It was his weakest work because of the lack of efficient foreshadowing and the cheapness of some of the things that happened. I'm not saying they're cheap. I'm just saying they're cheaper than they would have been in a different one of his books. So, for example, Adien, I didn't like how conveniently he just knew the distance to the place where we needed to go. Like, although he kind of, you know, worked that in there and he'd been counting the whole entire way, and it seems like, you know, there's something wrong with his brain, but obviously the show had taken him way too convenient. I didn't like how simply Raoden flew through every single challenge. Every time he needed to talk to someone and make something happen, they put up like zero resistance. And maybe it's because he's such a great leader of men, but it's just not very believable. And there's a few other things as well. And there's nothing that ruined the story for me. Not even anywhere near, but it was just convenient. And it's something I said in a previous video, was it just felt like this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. And there was a big lack of like, therefore why, because. And I think it's just, he's finding his feet with interweaving and foreshadowing and creating those whys and making things feel like they happen for a reason rather than just happening. So those are my thoughts. Tell me, what were your thoughts on Elantris? First of all, did you read it first? Because I'm pretty deep into the Cosmere now, so I'm reading it more in an order that people have suggested reading, rather than reading Elantris first. And those of you who found Brandon Sanderson a long time ago, maybe this is what you first read, and what was your opinion on Elantris before you had anything else in the Cosmere to compare it to? If you read it where I read it, were you a little bit disappointed? Or were you like me, where you thought, it's okay, I'm happy it's there, I'm going to move on to the next thing? Tell me all, what were your opinions? So for those of you interested in my life, I had a baby 6 weeks ago. Luckily, when I had the baby, I had four weeks of videos already planned ahead. But it has been slow going with finding time to read, and even slower going with finding time to make videos between going to work. I work full time, supporting my wife, and, you know, taking care of myself and trying to get some sleep as well. So my plan is always to keep reading and talking to you guys every single week. However, we're getting to a point where the weeks are going by faster than I had videos scheduled. So we may get to a point where things slow down a bit, but I'm committed to the channel and I love speaking with you guys in the comments. So just a little update on my life. I'll see you next week.